Hello everyone. To the cinema with you. Today, we will analyze the plot of the drama series Itaewon Class. A harsh teacher punishes truants at school, including Pax Roy, who does not skip classes, but tries to stand up for his friends. When Puck gets tired of holding a full bucket over his head, he just pours all the water on himself. Soon Pak is transferred to another school, as his father gets a new position. The guy's father has been working for a large corporation Jenga group for many years, although during this time, he has not achieved great heights. At the new school, Park sits down next to a pretty girl Oh-soo. Soon, the local bully Chang-won, a spoiled major and the son of the owner of the Young Group Corporation, flies into the classroom. Jang-won immediately begins to mock the frightened nerd Lee, and Park is surprised that no one even tries to stop the bully. In the end, Puck gets tired of looking at these bullying, and he stands up for the nerd. The bully threatens the newcomer with violence, but he does not give up. At this moment, a teacher enters the classroom, who is also afraid to say anything to the bully, and simply asks the guys to sit at their desks. In the end, the impudent Jenwon continues to mock Lee, so Park can't stand it, and sends the major to the floor with a powerful blow to the jaw. Soon, the participants of the brawl are called to the school principal, who beats Pak with a stick. Jang Dehee, Jae-yongwen's father, tells Park to apologize for beating his son, threatening to fire the student's father otherwise. Park continues to insist that he is right, then Chan fulfills his threat and fires Park's father, who has worked faithfully in his company for more than 10 years. Park and his father go to a small diner, where they discuss plans for the future. The man declares that he is going to fulfill his old dream and open his own diner, and Puck promises to support Dad in everything. That's only the next day in the evening, when Park's father goes home on a moped, he is hit by a car, and the man dies on the spot from his injuries. The police talk to the inconsolable Pak and tell him that the culprit of the accident in which his father died is ready to pay a large sum of money if the guy refuses all charges. Park is so shocked by such impudence that he is even speechless. Later, Seo, seeing photos of the car of the culprit of the accident in Park's hand, realizes that the vehicle belongs to Jenwon, who recently boasted of his new cool car. Park becomes enraged when he realizes that billionaire Jang has bribed the police to get Gangwon out of the murder of his father. An angry Park finds Jenwon and begins to beat him severely. When the bully falls to the ground, Pak grabs a stone, intending to finish off the major, but he is stopped by the police who appeared. The guy goes to jail, and soon Chan comes to him. The rich man offers to forget about beating his son if Park, in turn, forgets about the fatal accident in which his father died, and asks him for forgiveness on his knees. The guy sharply replies that he will never kneel in front of anyone. So far, they are being put on trial, which sentences the young man to a long term of imprisonment. And the police chief, bribed by Chan, tells the detective to hush up the case of the death of Park's father, who does not dare to contradict the boss. In prison, the evil convicts led the young Pak to kneel, and when he refuses, the criminals brutally beat him. After a while, Seo comes to Park for a date in prison, who says that she will study at the university. It turns out that Chan paid for the girl's studies in full, since it was she who called the cops on the night when Park almost killed Gangwon. 3 years later, Park is released from prison. Seo, having learned about this, invites the guy to come and see her in the city where she now lives. Park accepts the invitation and meets with Seo, who has become even more beautiful over the years. The girl reveals that she now works for the Young Group and controls the operation of their chain of eateries. In response, Park shares that he is also going to open his own diner in the area, as his father dreamed about it all his life. Park likes Seo, but he does not dare to ask her out. At the same time, at school, several hooligans, led by their leader, spoiled by the daughter of a policeman, mock a weak classmate. Joy Sot secretly shoots this mayhem, and then puts the video on the internet, which is gaining hundreds of thousands of views. A few days later, the mother of the disgraced hooligan meets a popular blogger Joe on the street, and slaps her for a shameful video with her daughter. Jolish smiles as her friend Gansu films everything happening on camera. The woman wants to hit John again, but her hand is stopped by a Puck who happened to be here. Joe slaps the woman back and drives off with Gansu, leaving Park perplexed. The next day, Joe is scolded for what happened at school, but she doesn't attach any importance to it. A few days later, Gansu rides a moped with Joe and abruptly presses the brake, so as not to run over a little girl who ran out onto the road. Joe flies out of his seat and lands right on top of Puck, who, in a big suit, was handing out flyers advertising his newly opened diner to passersby on the street. Joe gets off with only a slight fright, and the unconscious Puck is taken to the hospital, but in the end everything ends well. Park Dazana invites Joy Gansu to visit his diner one day. A few days later, a couple wants to have a beer at a small eatery that belongs to the Junga group. That's just turned out to be Tamsua declares that they do not sell alcohol to minors. Then Joe and Hansu decide to look into Puck's diner, where there are no customers at all. At this time, Park himself nearby complains to Sue that visitors are bypassing his canteen. When the two break up, Swa notices the same teenagers in Park's diner with alcohol, and, without thinking at all, calls to report it to the police. Joe and Hansu quickly get drunk, and the guy arranges a brawl in the diner, in which Choi, one of the employees of the institution, is involved. The police arrived soon and took everyone indiscriminately to the police station. Jenwon suddenly appears, as it turns out that the bully in the diner was his younger half-brother Gansu, and his father sent the guy to take him home. Seeing the arrogant major, the policeman immediately begins to smile, promises to settle everything, and release all the detainees in the near future. When Park goes outside, Jenwon catches up with him and starts provoking him, reminding him of the death of his father, so that the guy attacks him again. Park looks coldly at the major, after which he declares that he will certainly avenge his father's death, and that during the years spent in prison, he has developed a terrible plan of revenge. From the flashback, we learn that Park and Che met in prison, where they became friends, and on the outside, Che agreed to work in the main character's diner. Currently, Joe is sitting in some diner with three guys he knows. The girl doesn't really like this company, and she leaves, but one obsessive boyfriend follows her. Then Joe throws a few bills at Molested and offers him to use the services of priestesses of love. The offended guy chases after the girl, who has to run into the men's room, where Puck happens to be. The main character stands up for the girl and imprints the intrusive type into the wall. At the same time, Chan considers Swa as his possible successor in the future, since, in his opinion, Jenwon will immediately break up his corporation. Puck and Joe have a drink together, and the girl agrees to become a worker in the guy's cafe. The next day, the girl comes there with Gansu, who apologizes for his violent behavior last time, and also gets a job with a budding businessman. Joe, it turns out, cooks very well and quickly makes a few edits to the dining room menu. In addition, she suggests adding lighting and changing the interior to make the institution more attractive to visitors. She also shares with her numerous subscribers in social networks the news about the opening of a new cozy cafe. On the same evening, a whole crowd of visitors comes to the cafe, and Swa, who happened to be nearby, looks at it with surprise. Meanwhile, Gansu remembers how badly he was treated in the family. It turns out that Jensu is Chan's illegitimate son, whose fate does not care too much about the businessman, unlike the spoiled Jenwon. That's also why Gansu had to get a job with Park. At the same time, Chan's board of directors is discussing in which direction the corporation will develop. If the billionaire retires for any reason, Chan himself, along with Swa, bypasses his catering establishments. The rich man would like the purposeful and intelligent Swa to marry Gunvan, but he understands perfectly well that his son does not like the girl. At Park's cafe, Joe becomes his right-hand man and expresses dissatisfaction with the way Cook Song Hyun cooks food. Then Puck calls him in, but, to everyone's surprise, does not dismiss the guy, and even pays him a bonus, provided that he works twice as hard in the kitchen. Hooligans and Joe's former classmates notice a girl on the street and decide to make fun of her. It turns out that Swa didn't call the police at Pak's cafe that night. The hooligans did it when they saw Joe drinking inside. Upon learning about this, Joe becomes enraged and playfully beats up all the hooligans. The next day, Joe shares with Park that it wasn't Sue who called the police in the cafe, but hooligans with whom she has had a strained relationship for a long time. After learning about this, Park realizes how much he was wrong about Swa and soon finds her at the bus stop. The guy invites the beauty on a date, but she replies that it is inappropriate because of her work in the Jenga group, after which she gets on the bus, and Park shouts after her that he will destroy the entire corporation of competitors in order for them to be together. Park then calls his friend Lee, the same nerd who was bullied by Jae-won. It turns out that a few years ago, Jae-won quarreled with a major shareholder of the Jang Group, which caused a scandal that led to a short-term decline in the corporation's shares. Park then managed to buy a decent number of shares of Jang, which during this time greatly increased in price. After a while, Park decides to expand the staff of the cafe and hires a dark-skinned Tony to communicate with foreigners, among other things. A few days later, Chan finds out that Park has already bought a lot of shares in his corporation and decides to visit the guy's diner. The guy is surprised to see a rich man who wants to know why he needs so many shares of Young Group. Park responds by saying that he simply believes in the huge potential of the corporation. But the businessman does not believe the young man, confident that he wants to somehow avenge his father's death. Meanwhile, Lee becomes a fund manager. In a flashback, Lee now broadcasts Park in prison, who shares that in the future he wants to destroy the Young Corporation and finds a new ally in the nerd. In the present time, Lee believes that they should have saved up more money, then in a year, they would have been able to buy more shares of Jang. It turns out that Park invested almost all of the money left to him after his father's death in the company's shares. Lee says that they need their own person in the corporation, which can be his acquaintance Kong Min-jon, who works there in a high position. However, the ambitious Miss Kong declares that she will never go against the interests of the company, but, according to Park, there is no need for this. She needs to run for president of the company and eventually take control of it. Park shares that he owns 1% of Jang's shares, which is not so little. When the next shareholders meeting takes place, he promises to support Miskin as the new president of the company. After all, everyone knows that Jae-won won't be of any use. A few days later, Chan invites Miskin to his home, where he thanks her for her hard work in the company. However, when the woman leaves, the boss is informed that Miss Kong has met with Park. Soon Puck comes to the detective who led the case of his father's death. The detective himself has already left the service, but his daughter really wants to serve in the police. During the conversation, the detective suddenly begins to apologize to the guy and admits that he, at the request of the police chief, let down the brakes on the case of his father's death. The next step is taken by Chan, who simply buys the building in which Park's cafe is located. After that, the billionaire tells Park that he raises the rent for him by 5%, and if the guy refuses, then in 6 months, he will throw him out when the lease term ends. Because of this, Park has to withdraw some funds from Janji's shares, which turns out to be very dissatisfied with Miskin, since each such move reduces her chances of becoming president of the corporation. Park explains that he can't sacrifice the cafe and his employees, who have become like family to him. Meanwhile, Joe encourages Gansu to quit, believing that then Chan will finally leave them alone. However, Pak has already found another solution. He just buys the entire building where his cafe is located, which is why he had to sell part of Janji's shares. Later, Joe pretends that she is interested in working in Jang, after which the owner himself, and then his son, try to lure her to him. At first, the girl talking in a cafe seems to agree to Jae-won's proposal and even provokes him to admit that he was the one who knocked Park's father to death in his car, and some homeless man took the blame for this crime. Seeing that Joe is recording his words on a dictaphone, Jae-won chases after her and catches up with her on the street, where a crowd of people immediately gathers because of the girl's screams. Jae-won throws money at them, confident that anyone can be bought. People immediately rush to pick up the bills, but at this moment Puck appears, who knocks out the major with a powerful blow and calls the police. The next day, a former detective comes to Park's cafe as his new grocery supplier. At this moment, the detective's daughter runs away after the cat, but quickly gets lost on the street and finds herself face to face with Miss Kong. Soon, the most worried detective appears, who thanks Miskin for stopping his daughter, and they go to a cafe together. Along the way, the detective notices them being followed and deftly snatch a video camera from the pursuer. At the diner, the guys look through the camera footage and realize that Chan has been following Miskin for a long time. Joe puts an audio recording of Jae-won's revelation on the internet, and soon the whole city already knows that Park's father died because of a major. An angry Chan hits his son hard, who once again caused irreparable damage to the reputation of his company. Park believes that now is the time for Miskin to challenge Chan, as shareholders have finally become disillusioned with him. After consulting Seo, Chan makes a cardinal decision. He tells Jenwen to start cooperating with the police, otherwise they will completely lose control of Janga. The billionaire himself organizes an extraordinary press conference, at which he suddenly declares that it was Jenwen who crushed Park's father to death a few years ago. According to Chan, he only now found out about this monstrous crime of his son and immediately reported it to the police. As a result, Chan gets away with it, and Jenwon ends up in the dock and is sentenced to 7 years in prison. Park, like the others, is surprised that the rich man turned over his own son in order to remain in power in the company. The cold and calculating Chan tells Park that the guy has unleashed a war in which he will never win. After a while, Swa comes to Jenwon's prison and, on behalf of the boss, offers to buy all the shares of the company from the guy. But he refuses. Gansu is increasingly frustrated by the war between Park and his father. He comes to Chan's office and says he wants to work for him. Knowing that Jenwon will never succeed Chan, Gansu wants to prove to his father what he is capable of. Meanwhile, the first round of the culinary competition takes place, in which Mei Henyi wins. Cook Paka and Cook Janji takes only second place. On the same day, a respectable man comes to the cafe who tells Park that he wants to invest his money in expanding his thriving business. Realizing that he has a very serious competitor in the person of Young Group, the young man accepts the investor's offer. In the second round of the culinary competition, the result is exactly the same. Then Gansu persuades his father to let him lead their team in the final round of the culinary competition. Meanwhile, the mysterious investor simply disappears, and Park does not yet realize that these are the next machinations of competitors. It turns out that the investor is a friend of Chan, and naturally he was not going to invest a penny in Park's cafe. Park's employees are furious, as the guy also attracted their savings for an investment project. And now they risk being left with nothing. Park reassures the workers and promises to return them all the invested funds, even if they have to take out a loan. Suddenly, Tony's rich grandmother named Kim Sunr is announced, who, unlike her dark-skinned grandson, turns out to be a pure-blooded Korean. She even offers to invest in the expansion of Park's business, but the guy who received an unsuccessful experience is not ready to accept her offer. Sunr also tries to dissuade Chan from confronting Park, but the rich man does not even think of backing down. Mei Henyi almost leaves the final of the culinary competition. As Jensu posted candid details of her personal life on the internet, Joe wonders how their former colleague decided on such meanness, but he seems to be interested only in Janji's victory in the competition. Nevertheless, Park and the rest of the cafe's employees support Mei Henyi, who is inspired again, and confidently wins the culinary contest. After the contest, Gansu confesses to Josh that he did this disgusting act just for her. It turns out that Gansu has been in love with Jo for a long time. For her sake, he even wants to come to power in Jang and stop their confrontation once and for all. At the same time, Chan is happy with how Jensu behaves and introduces him to the board of directors of Janji as his successor. Park eventually agrees to accept Sunri's investment, thanks to which his business should show rapid growth. Several years pass. Now the experienced Park and his team have a whole chain of cafes, and they are negotiating with Chinese partners about further business expansion. In Jang, Jensu becomes one of the leading leaders, while Chan, who is weakening in front of his eyes, is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Park tries to mend relations with Chan, but to no avail. Jenwon is finally released from prison, but Chan is not very happy to see him. Joe works so hard that he faints from overwork and ends up in the hospital. Gansu comes to visit the girl and meets Park there. Gansu even confesses to the guy that he has long been in love with Joe, and his dream is to stop the long-standing confrontation between their companies. The next evening, Puck wants to visit Joe at the hospital, but she is not in the room. Park and Gansu go in search of the girl, but the road is blocked by several cars, from which a group of scumbags, who were paid by Jenwon for Joe's abduction, comes out. One of the bandits tries to hit Gansu with a car, but Park pushes him aside and takes the blow on himself. Gansu manages to call the police, and Jenwon, before leaving with his scumbags, looks angrily at the bloody Park, confident that he will die on the side of the road in the same way as his father died a few years ago. The bandits take Gansu with them, and the ambulance that appeared soon takes the injured Park to the hospital. After learning about the incident, Swa finally decides to resign from Janji. Jae-won calls Chan and says that all he dreamed of was having a father who would be proud of him. The guy also blames Chan for everything that happened because it was he who forced his son to commit terrible deeds in the past. The bandits tie up Gansu and Jo and lock them in some room. The couple manages to free themselves, and as soon as Jae-won comes inside, they hit him hard on the head with a stick. Park wakes up in the hospital and immediately goes to Chan with a request to release his friends. The old man demands that an old enemy kneel before him, and Park has to obey, since he has no other choice. Then Chan smiles contentedly and reveals that Jae-won most likely took the prisoners to his old abandoned warehouse. Park and Choi hurry to the indicated place and meet a frightened Jo on the road. Park wants to get the girl out of here as soon as possible. Choi gets into a fight with bandits. Jae-won catches up with the couple and immediately runs into Park, who broke his life. However, Park again manages to defeat the Oborzovshi major at the end and send him to a knockout. The police soon arrest all the criminals, and Vaughn goes back to prison, firm where he will not be released very soon. Chan realizes that his world, which he has been building all his life, is now completely destroyed. The sick, unhappy billionaire voluntarily goes to Park's cafe, where he asks the guy for forgiveness for everything. And even kneels in front of him, feeling how fierce hatred has consumed his whole life. This is where the confrontation between Chan and Park finally ends. And ahead of the guy and his team are waiting for many more amazing discoveries.